before we get going too far, I would just like to see Meg. There's so much going on, whether it's oil trains or this or that. So much going on. Why is this your issue?
The issues that this House bill brings up are not new. And so this is my issue for a couple of reasons. Not only because as a tenant here in Portland for almost 15 years, I think we're all, I think to say we're feeling the pinch is a gross understatement. And also,
Some more than others, yeah.
Yeah, right. And also because, on the historic preservation standpoint, this is also part of what is kind of included in this bill as well, and what's at risk. Portland, the fabric, the historic heritage. I live in Sunnyside, so I'm surrounded by.
That's close in Portland.
Yeah. And I think a lot of community members that live close in have seen their neighborhoods just eviscerated.
I think that we'll move. I think you might be having issues with your. I'll make sure it's plugged in down here for her. Sometimes these things get moved around, and
Is it all the way plugged in?
it's all together. Yep. Go see how it sounds now. We'll move over to Manda next, because I want to get back to that, because you mentioned the historic aspect of it, and that's one of the organizations that we're here to talk about.
Yes.
Was the historic Eastmoreland Achieving Results Together. That's a great name, and I'll not be able to remember it here before the end of the show, I think.
That's why we go by heart.
By heart. That's a good one, too.
Yeah.
That really helps.
Yeah.
And then Manda, what brings you to this particular issue? There's so many things you could be involved in if you were of an activist mind, and a lot of it, this is something happens in people's backyard, so to speak, and it might be with you there that they decide, well, I need to lend my shoulder to the grindstone on this. So.
Yeah, so I live in Eastmoreland, and I'm a resident of that neighborhood, and we started noticing demolitions. I think we've all started noticing demolitions across the city, and they were increasing over the last few years. And our neighborhood is currently going through a nomination process to be designated a National Historic District. And how we got to that point was that we spent 5 years trying to work with the city on kind of getting things rezoned to prevent this, raise and replace development by developers. And the city had their own agenda. And so we kind of felt, well, we did know that a historic designation was the last option to offer demolition protection to the historic homes in Eastmoreland. And so my neighborhood has been going through kind of a contentious battle between neighbors on this issue. And, you and I were talking earlier, I thought I was just starting a little grassroots group of neighbors that were going to come together and try to get out good information to people. I did not realize that there was politics or so much politics involved. And so here I am. I'm now, aware of so many things going on in our city with, now with House Bill 2007 and with the affordable housing crisis. And we recognize that part of the issue is that these developers come in and they demolish, because our smaller, more affordable homes are at risk and they're vulnerable. So they come in, they demolish these homes, and then they build, two $1.2 million homes in its spot. So it's not creating affordability. It's just making it harder for people to find, and they're also demolishing the rental stock and all of that stuff. So, so yeah, that's how I got involved.
I can see why you would, because it affects us all personally. And another thing I noticed that when I first got involved in this sort of thing is that it's so many other issues that you may not think are a part of what you're interested in. You find out that they are all connected.
Right.
And that's I think that's where we start to realizing, it is political, because so many of the same reasons why this is happening or that is happening, or because it's the same players involved,
right,
or the same values involved.
It's interesting too, I think, especially talking about realizing how these things are all connected. So I've been an active member of Stop Demolishing Portland for several years, and watching these things escalate. And for a long time, there were people that were saying, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And there was this sort of conceptual difference between historic preservation and demolitions. And now that we're seeing demolitions everywhere, and now that it's become clear that National Historic Designation is the only stopgap, it's the only thing that says, let's talk about this before you demolish this. Now it's becoming clear that demolitions and historic preservation and affordability are all connected. They don't exist separately. They all affect one another, and so that the debate over all of these things starts to coalesce and to come to fruition into things like the House bill that is clearly development interest, and so they all are connected. And now we're all, instead of playing whack-a-mole with demolitions, now we've all gotten to the point where we're talking to one another, we're sharing information, and we realize that all of our issues, all of our causes are all connected.
Yes.
And at the root of that is speculative development, is for-profit industry that is that has very, very few restraints, particularly on its ability to inflate this market by
Yes.
virtue of demolition. And it's not just happening to our existing affordable rental stock in neighborhoods that are sort of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, where rentals are plentiful, they're cheap. But it's also happening in areas like Eastmoreland, where they will go in and demolish a beautiful historic home. They'll pay $800,000 just because the land is more valuable to them, because they know they can sell a $1 million home there, and two of them.
$2 million.
Yeah, and under the House bill, which we'll talk about later, that will open up even more of that opportunity to developers under the premise of providing affordability. And those two things don't, affordability and speculative development and no rent control, those things together don't equal a more greater livability.
Well, when you got an urban growth boundary that's got everything pinched in, they're not going to go together.
Well, I would say too that part of what we're seeing is they're saying, there's just no room, and so we have to demolish. And within the urban growth boundary, there actually is ample buildable land. They just want it where it gets the most profitable. So that's where we're seeing our neighborhoods eviscerated, and they're saying, well, that, hey guys, there's, hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be coming here, and they all want housing, and we have no other alternative except to make room by demolitions. And that's just patently false. They want to build their $1 million homes in Eastmoreland. They want to build them close in so that they can sell them for $1 million, because they, and meanwhile, all of those other communities that are still within the urban growth boundary are being neglected. They're underserved. They want walkability. They want the vibrancy that comes with density, and they're not getting it because there is virtually there's no profit motive out there, and especially before this bubble bursts.
Sure. Well, what you're saying is making sense, and I think that perhaps groups such as yours and others as well are probably having an effect, and that's why the builders and all those are going down to Salem. You think that might have something to do with it, man?
That the builders are going down to Salem
to pass laws.
Oh, yeah. I really do believe that they just want to make it easier for themselves. Obviously, I mean, that's what the House bill is all about. But they can, get those demolition delays, annihilated. They can get design guidelines and planning annihilated, so that way they can raise and replace and put up things that they want to put up as quickly as possible. But it's not speaking to that affordable housing area. The missing middle is what they call it, right? That what they're talking about is not. I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. But basically, they're talking about housing that they're not building. Is is essentially what it is.
Yeah, I've noticed they've been putting some pictures of it. We've been talking, and they've been picking some pretty good ones too. That are,
Yeah.
we're sitting here talking, we're not looking at what's on the screen, but they just showed a place that all the windows were gone and they were boarded up. I guess we're probably getting it ready to demolish it. And it occurs to me, I was talking to your husband there, but I think it was your husband anyway, before the show, and it occurred to me that you drive down the freeway and Oakland says it's Oakland Historical District, like the whole downtown's a historical district.
Right.
There's these all over the state, and it isn't just Portland that's under the gun for this as well. And so, you familiar with any of the battles or any support or anything going on anywhere else, or you folks just focused here in town?
For historical preservation?
Yeah.
Well, there's Laurelhurst locally is going to be trying to fight for their neighborhood to get it a National Historic Designation.
So for the district, you mean?
Right, right. But I don't know if are we talking about House Bill yet? Or
Well, no, but I think in general,
Good time to get into
but
it.
in general too, I think your question about historic districts elsewhere, I think that it's easy to be myopic in Portland, where. And especially also in Oregon, because Oregon is unique in the country. Oregon has what's called owner consent regulation that came along in 1996, which basically there's no ability for people to designate things as being historic without owner consent. So since then, we've seen historic preservation, tank, and historic districts throughout the country look a lot different. And so it's not just about, there's a wide variety. And so there are other states and other districts that are trying to preserve history, trying to preserve rich cultural heritage. And especially when that just happens to be in a place that originally was, when the affluent folks didn't live in cities, this was where minorities and poor people lived in these historic districts. And then when people started migrating, from the suburbs and wanting to live in the cities, well, those historic districts all of a sudden had to scramble to say, like, this is a complete community. There is a history here, and these buildings, are home to a vibrant community. What can we do to save them? And so in other states that don't have owner consent, these are travel destinations.
Right.
You go to I said this the other day. You go to New Orleans. You don't want to go out to a strip mall and go shopping at Marshall's. You want to go to the French Quarter, and you can.
Flavor of the town.
Right.
Yeah. So it looks a lot different in Portland because there is so much development going on, and it's so contentious because there's billions of dollars to be had if they remove the last regulation, which is historic districts, and that's what they want to do throughout the entire state. They want to deregulate demolitions and to change zoning everywhere to allow them to just get in there and smash and build things out of chipboard. And Oregon is unique in that we are unprotected except for national historic districts.
I had no idea. Well, if anybody wants to drive out Vancouver or Williams Boulevard,
Right.
I couldn't believe what that place looked like. And there's been some really good documentaries on what has been happened up in certain portions of North Portland, and now they're moving out along the Max train on there in Lentz. Doing that there too, and there's not a whole lot of demolition going on there, except on the corner of 92nd and Foster. They tore down 3 whole corners of it, and they're moving along with moving things into there. And there's going to be progress, but it's just like a bunch of piranhas. It seems to me that are just feasting on the carcass of what used to be a livable city.
It's profitable.
I believe of view. Yeah, I mean that's the way I feel about it too. It seems like they're just kind of coming in and there's not any thoughtful planning, not any thoughtful change going on, right? They're just about making money and getting it done and getting in there and raising everything and putting up something else. And Meg has been really great about giving me information about demolitions and how that's impacting our environment and I think, what did you say? It's like for a 1,200 square foot home, it's 60,000 pounds of landfill waste. That's just going into the landfill. That's not including any of the recyclable materials. And so it does have an impact. It has an impact on our environment, our livability, on the flavor of our city, and all of those things. And affordability, most importantly, right? That's the biggest issue here, is having housing or homes that people can that are affordable, and that's not at $1.2 million. We're not talking about people that John Liu, somebody that we know that is with Laurelhurst, attended a talk with one of the people that's sponsoring this bill, the House Bill 2007, and she said something along the lines of, even people making $300,000 a year need to find a house. And it's like, give me a break. That's not somebody that, they can afford a house. They may not like what the inventory is, but they can afford a house. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people that, smaller affordable homes that are being sold full cash, that are going to developers for full cash. And then, that's circumventing a family that could buy it for a lower price and maybe put some sweat equity into it and, make it nice and live in it for a long time and love it up and be a part of the community, right?
Shop in the local stores, send their kids to the local schools.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I can see exactly what you mean. It's, and Lents keeps popping into mind and those areas out there, and it's no longer a livable city, and it's probably too late. Obviously, it's too late to ever go back to where it was. I first moved up here in 1972. It was 200 and some odd thousand. Now, 45 years later, I think it's, I don't know, between 500 and 600,000. And the metro area is probably 3 to 4 times that. And this particular bill, I don't know if it would affect places like Beaverton and Gresham, which is all, McDonald's and big shopping malls and all. There's not a lot of historic out there like there is here.
So there's one aspect to the bill that has to do with historic preservation, and that and that has to do with and so part of where these things coalesce is that as I was saying earlier, part of what's undermining affordability has to do with demolitions. And we live in a city where 50% are renters, and 50% of single-family homes are rentals. And we know that sort of the pathway to stability is to provide a pathway from rentership to homeownership to being able to sort of have a stable, livable life. And so our affordable stock is being demolished. People are being displaced. So there's also this idea that this is not because of supply and demand. This is because of market rate and because of speculation. So that's something we need to make clear. And then part of the bill has to do with removing the only regulation left that subjects demolitions to review. Everything else is fair game. And we're sort of left with no voice and no control. The other part of that has to do with, in Portland, there's been going on, you might have heard about the residential infill project. So it's basically changing zoning so that developers can add density, which under the premise that it will eventually somehow, by virtue of maybe trickle-down economics.
I'm just thinking that.
Exactly. Once you start, it starts to come to mind, doesn't it? Is that they're building all of this market rate where the sky, it's priced at whatever the market will bear, and saying, okay, we're going to add supply, and that's going to create affordability. But it's not. It just is making things more expensive. And part of what this bill does is wants to apply this residential infill project zoning, which allows for greater density, which promotes and incentivizes demolishing homes in order to put the density that gives profit. And they want to apply that throughout the entire state, and to do that at the state level instead of each local government deciding if it fits their city or their county. They're saying, if you're not going to do it, we're going to take it, we're going to usurp local control, And communities already feel voiceless. They already say, hey, doesn't our neighborhood have a voice? Don't we have any seat at the table, even when they do have local control? And so this development-backed interest wants to usurp that and say, we're going to force this on you. And the Home Builders Association in particular, they are pulling out all of the stops, and they've got quite a woefully successful misinformation campaign going, and this bill is part of it. But it would affect places like Beaverton, even if it's not historic. What it does is that it opens up the land and says, you no longer get to say, and if it's valuable there, then that's where they'll go. And
well,
you
it's
don't get to say.
effectively rezoning the entire state of Oregon from single family residence zoning to multifamily zoning.
It's
Everywhere.
basically a
And so
sovereignty issue in some ways.
Yeah, but in all residential districts,
And
it
all-
says this is no longer a single family home or single family district. And that opens the doorway, especially in a state without historic preservation save national status, that opens the doorway for, you think it's bad, it's been bad here in Portland, with demolitions and cranes everywhere. Imagine that anywhere in the state where profit is to be had, in every residential neighborhood, where they can say, here's a corner lot, here's a single family home that I can get for cheap, and I can put $2 million homes there.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, I was thinking earlier, it's probably mainly the I-5 corridor. You got Portland, Salem, Eugene, and there's 250,000 people down there in the Medford area.
Well, it's also places that are tourist attractions. So think about places like Bend. And other places that,
Or even at the coast.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. And these are these sort of seasonal communities too, where it's a real city with a real community, and yet when the sun comes out, it's a tourist destination. But there's a lot of profit to be had in those communities. So it would open up the entire state to unfettered speculative development.
Sure. Well, Amanda, I don't know, we've been talking a lot, mostly about just affordability for buying homes, but I don't know if you rent or you buy, but I know that just recently we had to move, and turns out that pretty much every house that's for rent now is through a property development, and they demand 3 times on the books, 3 times the amount of money of your rent in order to even consider you for renting that. Is that anything that your organization is working with?
We really
Specifically?
aren't. Specifically, no. We are concerned about the smaller, more affordable homes because they usually are rental stock. So when you're talking about these homes that, the owners own them for a million years and they rent them out, and then all of a sudden they decide, okay, I'm going to cash out, I'm done, I'm retiring. And those homes are being, they're more vulnerable to developers with that full cash offer. And then they will get raised. And what is replaced is going to be an owner-occupied $1 million home. You're not going to rent that home. So we're looking at it from the standpoint that it decreases the amount of the inventory of rental stock. But we don't have a specific mission to for rentals specifically. Right now, we're just trying to prevent demolitions in our neighborhood generally, which would help because we do have a number of rental properties in the Eastmoreland neighborhood.
Well, the effect, you really can't separate the two anyway. Like you say, you made a good point for that.
One of the things, though, that's what you were talking about that is important to note that not a lot of people are aware of. And part of what you were saying about these big companies now, more and more of these big property ownership is that Wall Street is now in the landlord business. And so when the housing market crashed in 2008 and all of those foreclosed homes were scooped up and bought for cash, and they bundled them up and bought them way below market, but they were valuated in their portfolios at market value. And then what they did is there's these huge corporations that have been buying up rental properties here in Portland. Blackstone, America Homes for Us. They're doing this in cities all across the country, but in Portland they've been here for a couple of years buying up homes in bulk and buying up apartments. And so you've got Blackstone, they they created a new financial product in 2013, which is rental-backed securities, kind of in the same structure as they were packaging up those subprime mortgages in 2008. It's these bespoke tranche deals. So now they realize that there's all this profit in the rental market, and Wall Street is now officially offering financial products that are rental-backed securities. So you can see there that the incentive now to the shareholders is to provide profits that go like this, even though housing markets tend to go like this and prices go like this when you've got a sort of traditional approach to that. But now that it is even more profit-driven in the rental market in particular, but also we've got a huge migration of people getting priced out in places like Silicon Valley. And you've got Portland saying, bring your tech workers here. Here we'll incentivize the building of office buildings so that you can set up shop. And so all of this construction that's adding market rate luxury apartments, that's for them. That's for the people that haven't even gotten here yet. And meanwhile, what it's doing is displacing renters. And then they've got to find, like you said, you had to move. Well, good luck trying to find a place that isn't under corporate control, or that isn't, or that doesn't cost you 50%, 60%, or more of your salary. It's a sort of
Draconian.
Yeah, it's not affordability. It's the opposite of that, and this bill is also part of that, cloaked in affordability. So it's all, like you said earlier, it's all related.
Well, what you were saying, with that meltdown you talked about in 2008, there are some who believe, and I'm not totally one of them, but you said that they realized that they could do this and this and this because of that meltdown. Well, there are a lot of people that believe that was a deliberate situation, and they are now milking what they caused. So this was a long-range plan all along.
They shorted the market, and we could have a whole show just on this. I know, maybe next time.
And I'm sure Manda would want to be involved.
But it is pertinent to I'll try not to go long on this, but it is pertinent in that what it did is, there were those that said this can't, wow, this is, okay, we're going to bet against these homeowners. We're going to short the market. So when this thing explodes, and people are, we're talking about people's lives. We're not talking about, some sort of benign commodity. We're talking about when people lose their homes, they don't just move, some of them die. And so
especially since a lot of that bankruptcy it's a healthcare issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's all tied together in terms of just, it's really expensive to be poor. And so part of that created a whole bunch more renters. So they've got this captive marketplace. Then they said, let's take up all that cheap, really dirt cheap foreclosed housing now, and let's turn those into rentals.
And bump them up $300 or $400 a month.
Yeah, so the people that are trying to buy their first home in Portland, they're getting outbid by cash offers for developers who are just tearing it down. So they're removing opportunity for people to have a pathway to building wealth through home ownership. So they're keeping people trapped. And then we've got this hostage marketplace where they say, okay, we're going to raise the rent, and it's really expensive to move, so you stick with it, and pretty soon, if you weren't already living from paycheck to paycheck, now you're having to say, well, now I've got to find another job in another state because I can't afford to live in Portland.
Well, and one of the things that we were talking about earlier was the fact that this bill is centered around a 60% of the median family income as affordable housing. And when I was talking to Karen, who called in earlier, we were having a discussion about it, and we were talking about the fact that really it's the lower income housing that we really need. We need housing that's at 30% of the median family income. We need, kind of then you start to go into, how it impacts, our homeless situation, because you've got these people that are pretty vulnerable because they're on fixed incomes. I am not a rental, expert or anything like that. It's just, this is just the information that I've heard and I'm sharing with you. But, the idea that if you are renting your home, you get a no-cause eviction. You're already on a fixed income. Maybe you don't have a lot in savings, and now you have to figure out where you can live that is low-income housing, which they're tearing down.
Well,
they're tearing it all down, and then they're building market rate housing in its place, and that's what Meg and I were talking about earlier.
And the waiting lists for the affordable housing right now are years long, and they're not giving us affordable housing. Even when inclusionary zoning was going to, kick in, they said, building is slowed down. Everybody got their permits in so that they wouldn't have to do inclusionary zoning, and so this is this inverted solution where they said, well, the city will keep approving permits for luxury housing, and we'll just assume that some, maybe in 30 years that'll trickle down. And that just creates more pressure, upward pricing pressure, as people are displaced and try to stay within that city. It adds more pressure on the existing stock, which they're also demolishing. And this House bill, which says it's about affordable housing, has some provisions in there that say any housing, all housing, needed housing. And if it really was a bill about saying, okay, the developers are the ones that are going to deliver the goods, so we've got to write a bill so that they'll do what we want them and need them to do, then first of all, they didn't invite any of the people that actually have nonprofits that are in the business of providing affordable housing. They didn't even know about this bill. They didn't invite any of those people or any of the historic preservation advocates when they were crafting a bill that was going to eviscerate those regulations. It was the Home Builders Association and 1,000 Friends of Oregon who wants to promote density within the urban growth boundary so that their mission, which is to prevent sprawl outside of the urban growth boundary, is protected. So they crafted a bill that says any housing and all housing, which
creates a free-for-all within that UGB.
We know they're going to slip through those things, and so it really is a Trojan horse, and we really need to shine a spotlight on this. To just because it says affordable, it's easy. I can use any term I want to make something sound like it doesn't stink. But if you look at it, it stinks.
It stinks, walks like a duck. Well, you mentioned shine the light, so we've got some photographs here to kind of put some imagery to what we've been talking about. So let's move into that. It might take them a second to get it punched up here, but
that building has since been demolished.
Moving pretty fast there.
So
that one on the bottom is the one on the top, I take it.
Yes. So that's a home in Eastmoreland that was purchased by a developer. They purchased it for $750,000, and they put two homes in its place. One was 1.2, and the other one was 1
Is that
million.
down by Reed College, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't didn't that get flipped? And I think the sellers were told that it was going to be remodeled, and then it got flipped to a developer who tore it down.
The story is exactly that. The homeowners did not want to sell to a developer that was going to demolish their home. This was the trend already happening, so they knew it was a possibility.
Then.
Yeah, and so this developer came in, and they had this long conversation with them, and they said, we don't want you to demolish your home. And he said, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to renovate it, and I'm going to add a bedroom, and I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to sell it to a family. And then he ended up flipping it to another developer and they said the homeowners actually wrote a letter that was included in the information that was provided to, I think it was about the historic district when we were doing the nomination, but they said, they showed up with the keys, walked in while the homeowners were still there, and were there to start making their plans, of how they were going to demolish this home and what they were going to do. And I think the homeowners were really heartbroken over the fact that, if you think about it, they spent however many years, let's say 30 years living in that home, maintaining it, putting new roofs on it, like doing all of these things to maintain your home for 30 years just to see it demolished. It's like, why did you even spend that money? And this really is
perfectly livable the way it was.
Yeah, and it's really encouraging people just to not maintain their homes because they know they can just sell them to a developer, and the developer's going to tear them down.
We have other pictures as well.
This is another home that just recently got demolished just a few months ago. It's on 29th and Rex, And
That's
a lot
just-
of what they say, the developers try to say, well, this is a home that was in poor shape. It was a hazard. It needed to get torn down. So they use these justifications for demolishing these homes. But as you can see, you know, the interior of the home was in great shape. The original woodwork, stained glass windows.
It's a mansion to
It was
me.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a dream home. That's
Yeah.
that's
It
what you
is.
aspire
and
to.
and it's
Yeah.
a corner lot, and the corner lots are the most vulnerable because the developers, he's planning on splitting this lot, and he will also, it's a different developer, but he will also put something that's in that $1 million, 1.4, 1.2,
yeah.
somewhere around there. So
Yeah.
That's why they're going after historic districts. That's why, because there's value in that context, surrounded by, you know, that location, and those new homes that they've already built there. You know, they're saying, oh, this coveted location. So they know they can, you know, they can afford to buy something for that much just to tear it
Just to
down,
tear it down.
and replace it with something that will probably not last another 30 years because it's made of chipboard.
yeah.
And this is just like a middle class home.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean they're homes of all sizes. Those corner lots are most vulnerable because they can put the two really easily, but they put two in this spot as well. And this home, I don't exactly remember the cost, but I think it was definitely like maybe $500,000 that the developer bought it for, and he put two homes there that, you know, are probably in the $900,000 range.
Just gonna say,
So-
bring in a
I'd
couple
also
million.
like to say
Yeah.
too that they're also, you know, the $500,000 is still, you know, that's reasonable, but they're also tearing down $150,000 homes and
absolutely.
putting $1 million homes in those places. So they're keeping a whole broad spectrum of home ownership of actual people who would live in those homes out of the market, just so that they can sort of reduce the comparables and say, well, here's what's available. You will take what you can get, and we're going to basically corner the market by taking all that other stuff. They've got millions and millions and millions in financing.
Sure. I think that I just saw we had a phone call. Did I get that right? No, we didn't get a phone call. Maybe they went away. They were putting that up. That's what they were asking. All right. Well, you know, we're not going to get into this side issue, but I was talking about how so many issues connect up. Homelessness.
Yes.
That's a big one because a lot of these folks, you see people sit on the side of the street sometime with a bunch of belongings around them. Day before that, they probably had a home.
Yeah.
You know, and where do they go? They go out there. They're encouraged to go out along the corridor out there in East Portland, and then after, you know, a month of that, they're kicked out, even though they were encouraged by the mayor to do it. Which
Right.
brings up a question in my mind: is there any movement in a good direction with a newer mayor?
Well,
Obviously, this is not with downtown protests.
he just
but-
he just cut, I believe it's $1.4 million out of the new budget that would have gone towards maintaining and rehabilitating affordable housing, and that is housing for those people that are most at risk for homelessness. And so and that's part of the city's job, is to, that's where those subsidies come from, and that's, you know, our city's supposed to facilitate those. And so and the budget also, they beefed up the budget a little bit for patrols and for cleanup, for sweeps.
Sure.
And so this is all tied together in terms of, if you cannot force development, rather than the carrot, use the stick that says that this is the priority, not luxury housing, which is being permitted and built everywhere, but housing that is for those people not only that need it the most, but that for, you know, not only homeless sheltering, but also those that are on the edge and are most at risk for being thrown out on the streets. 2-year waits, that's
Sure.
ridiculous.
Well, how about housing for people that already live here rather than housing for people that are moving in?
Yes.
Which is what we're talking about. But I think we got a phone call. We'll get back to that. First caller, you're on the air, I believe.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. I do every week.
Yeah, I can hear you. It's kind of scratchy and.
All right, good. I know you're going to have something to bring to the conversation.
Well, and I got some questions, and I want to thank you for the topic. And I want to know how this legislation became something that our legislators thought was a good enough idea to push through. It doesn't sound Oregon to me.
No.
It sounds a lot like cut and paste Koch brothers or Alec, and it just sounds like
Alec.
something that's being railroaded through. The other thing is the way that these properties were acquired. I wonder if there is I'm sure there is a lot of them that were acquired through bankruptcies, just having to give it up because they can't hold on to it anymore. The bank turns it over to the property management companies and all that stuff. And so my question there is, if the property was lost due to the nefarious dealings of the bank to begin with, there's just something fishy about that I don't like. And then lastly,
the only one.
lastly, the properties themselves that are owned by these holding companies, it's one thing, the property is zoned residential. It's one thing to leave the house as it is, turn it over, sell it back to somebody else, the property company makes a bundle. Once it begins to become a tear-down rebuild through a big giant a holding company like that, I would hope that there could be some kind of legislation that calls that now commercial use. And, oh, I'm sorry, you cannot do that in a residential neighborhood, bye-bye. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for this
All right, you
program.
betcha.
I've learned a lot, and I know I will be learning more. Thank you.
All right, thanks for tuning in. He always throws out a whole shotgun affair of different ideas. Anything you want to respond to there first?
What was the last thing he said? He was talking about the fact that
Making something illegal, making it commercial when it isn't called commercial right now.
right, because they're actually making it's like a business.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
that's
point.
interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
That is a good thing, good way to look at that. And I think it was more or less. There weren't necessarily so much questions. He just wanted to bring out things for people to think about.
Well, I think one of the things that's important to mention, and his first sort of point was said, who thought this was a good idea? And especially now that we're talking about it, first of all, they tried to slip it under the radar. And because it said, hey, here, it's an emergency affordable housing bill. And like, no time to read it, no time to invite people that actually deal with affordable housing. You got to push this through. So then when
Sounds
people
like
start,
Trump care.
well,
Same thing.
we could have a whole conversation about that
it's just
too.
that whole way of doing legislation.
Yeah,
Same
well,
thing.
and this is slick, and part of this is a continuation of what the Home Builders Association did back in 2015. Back in 2015, by the way, when we were talking about the state of affairs in rental housing and how expensive things were getting in 2015, we weren't talking about supply. We were talking about the fact that because Portland was now on the radar and they knew more people were going to be living here, the rents were getting raised even before all of these big developments started going in.
Certainly are, yeah.
So it had to do with the market, and that's what we're seeing. And this bill, what happened at that time, you were talking earlier too about how maybe this House bill is a response to the fact that people are, it's now sinking in and advocacy is working, and people are saying, okay, we've got a tool, maybe it's the only tool, but we're going to use it. And that's a historic district. And now people are saying, oh, I get it now. It used to be these people 4 years ago that were saying, stop demolishing Portland, and I don't see any of that. But now it's everywhere, and everybody is saying, stop demolishing Portland. And so part of this bill, I think you're right on point with that, is not only sort of an attempt to say, well, gosh, now people are catching on, and we change our tactics. In 2015, the Home Builders Association, there was a demolition tax that they wanted to sort of de-incentivize demolition.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Now there's a brag piece out there. The Portland Metro Home Builders Association won a national award for their government affairs because they bragged about it, and it was on their website that said, normally we use the big stick approach with City Hall, and we go down there and we say, let us do what we want to do or we'll sue you, and it works. But because you had historic preservationists and the affordable housing advocates united saying, we need to slow this down, the Home Builders Association themselves said, we decided that the big stick wasn't going to work. So we made some interesting alliances with some of the more moderate affiliations. And because Portland is so progressive, basically it goes on to brag about how they engineered testimony, about how they seized the liberal agenda, the progressive agenda. They realized that it was gonna work to their benefit if they wrapped this stuff up and said affordability, and they started using the phrasing of the people that were in direct opposition to what they were doing, and it worked.
And they defeated the demolition
They
tax.
defeated the demolition tax, and then what they did is now we see that times 10 and on steroids, where now we see them saying, oh, affordability, and if you are for a historic district, then you are against affordability. If you are against demolitions, then you are against affordability. And that's just a false equivalence, because demolitions are demolishing affordable housing stock is what raises the price. And how can you call that affordability? But that's what this bill does. It calls demolitions affordability. It calls usurpation helpful. It is the opposite of everything that it says to be, with a couple of exceptions, but everything else is a giveaway.
Well, that brings up a good point. Since we're down to a little less than 8 minutes, I want to start with Manda. Your organization, Historic Eastmoreland Achieving Results Together, you have the Facebook page and also the .org as well.
Yes.
Now, do you talk about this 2007 bill there?
Yeah,
There we go.
There we go.
Oh, that's lovely.
We are starting that conversation. We're working with other groups that are, historic preservation groups, affordable housing groups. All of these groups are coming together to have these conversations to figure out what the bill really means, and then getting that information out to people. And as Meg said, this isn't something that just impacts Portland. This is a bill that they want to do for the entire state of Oregon. So it takes a lot of people coming together, not just people in Portland, but people all over the state that need to come together and talk about, is this really the right bill to get us what we want, right? And what we want is this housing that's for these people that live here already, right? We don't, we shouldn't be building these, luxury apartments for people that might come. We should be trying to house the people that are already here, and do it affordably. So we're definitely pro affordability. We don't see this bill as being something that's going to fill that need at all. And so, yeah, we've got information. Oh, it's gone now. We've got information on the website and on our Facebook page. That's, we're sharing a lot of information with a lot of people, and we're all writing content, and we're all trying to figure it out and work together.
Before we go to Meg, we also have a phone call, but there you go. There's that again. So, folks, just remember the I Heart Eastmoreland on Facebook, and it'll take you also will have a connection to the other one, and vice versa probably as well. So, next caller, you're on the air if I got that right. Hello, caller.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. We just joined late, and so you may have answered this already, but I'm wondering if the Portland RIP, Residential Infill Project, is going to be a solution or not. Can you comment on that, please?
Absolutely not.
This is,
Thanks for the question, because this is news to me.
Yeah, the residential infill project is what we were talking about earlier in terms of rezoning the entire state. And so the residential infill...
That's part of the 2007 bill?
Yeah, they don't call it residential infill project, but that is exactly what...
They're taking the zoning that they wanted to overlay, or that they are overlaying on the east side of Portland, and they're just saying, let's just do it for the whole state.
Yes.
So, no, the bill is actually not going to... it's not going to solve the residential infill project. It's just making it so it's statewide instead of just on the east side.
Yeah.
That's residential infill?
Residential
Infill project.
And
Infill.
Infill.
Oh, I've seen
They call it the
signs.
RIP.
I've
They call
seen
it the RIP.
signs saying something about no infill.
Earlier,
I had no idea what it meant.
Earlier, when we were talking about how sometimes life gives you those metaphors like trumped up, RIP, Portland RIP. I mean, RIP Portland is what this, and it's not that it's, I live in a district, I live in Sunnyside, and sort of kind of turns into Buckman, which is a dense neighborhood that is full of multifamily housing and all these different zones and all that kind of thing. That exists already.
And commercial.
And so what the residential infill project purports to be is saying, well, we want to all different kinds of housing in different neighborhoods. but where they're focusing on is saying, well, we want to demolish. We want to in order to do that, they want to wipe the slate clean and turn existing neighborhoods into that instead of infill, which says, oh, you've got a side yard, let's put a granny flat there. Or instead of going out to lower density neighborhoods that want and need that kind of housing further out and applying that there. So what they're calling infill, they're not actually filling stuff in as much as it is a premise by which they can take a single family home and then they can triple their profits on that lot. So what that does, if you think about now that the cost of that land isn't just 1, but it's 4, that drives prices up for everybody except for the developers who have and they've got millions of dollars of financing. They can just throw money at it.
And doesn't that bring taxes into the city too?
Oh yeah.
We didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
So they're profiting from this too, as well as the developers.
Big time.
Well, the city is giving away, waiving fees. Meanwhile, the people who actually live here, particularly people who rent, we're suffering. We're suffering, and a lot of people are leaving, not because they want to.
Well, because the homeowners have to pay more taxes because the comps in the area are selling at $1 million, so now you're paying more taxes on your property, not because you did anything to it, just because the other houses around you are getting more expensive. And then the landlords are passing that, that cost on to the renters. And I'm sure that there are plenty of people, plenty of landlords that are just taking advantage of the fact that that housing is so needed right now, and they're just driving up the prices anyway. But yeah, there's definitely other reasons.
We've
there.
only got a couple minutes left. This has all been very good, and the callers have been good. Now, I mentioned one side thing, which wasn't a side thing, was homelessness. But I also noticed that those houses were just being destroyed; they were being demolished, and there's no movement to recycle any of that. It looked like to me.
Oh no!
And if they were to recycle it, you said, and the thing you said something about that those pressboard homes won't be around in 40 years. Well, the wood that they just tore down would be around in 40 years.
It's old growth.
So they're throwing
That's
away the
where
good
our old
stuff,
growth
and
is.
they're putting the good.
The homes that we showed were 94 years old.
Right. So that was old growth, like you said.
So they're homes that were in great condition. They've lasted 94 years. I mean, we're not throwing our 94-year-old,
Right.
I'm not throwing my 94-year-old grandma away, right? Like these are people that, this is their soul in that house, and it was built by people that were craftsmen,
from craftsman to crap.
Right.
Well,
Right.
So we got a little over a minute left, so we kind of got sidetracked there. And then your organization is as well as involved with hers. You have a different organization. And
well, I mean, I'm here representing Stop Demolishing Portland.
That's right.
And that's really kind of like I said. Not only is it a
And
website
also
and a
this
Facebook
one there.
page, and also what we're going to be doing. Like I said, we're all still scrambling to understand the bill because it was slipped in under the radar. So we're also going to. We've registered the domain, and we'll be putting up some more information.
Well, what was the name of that
Demand
other
Affordability.
Demand Affordability, because we haven't even really talked about what people can do.
Well, and what people can do. So part
great
of
thing.
We got about a little over a minute here.
so
or 30
we
minutes.
want people to call their legislators and tell them that they oppose this bill, and that if it's going to pass, then it needs to be about affordability and not about developer giveaways.
And
so they really
the
need to look
Speaker of
into
the
it.
House is Tina Kotek, and so they can be emailing and calling Tina Kotek's office. They can be, in my area, the state representative is Kathleen Taylor, and our House representative is Karin Powers. I don't know who your House,
Well, I think
rep is.
We got about 10 seconds
I
here.
think
so.
I think
sorry.
Sanchez is also one of those representatives that that represents
All right,
a
well, that's
bunch
it for
of
tonight.
districts.
Tune in 2 weeks. Wish we had more time. And good night for now.
Thank you.